Today we are joined by GDPR. So we have 4 speakers throughout the whole event, and we have Jonathan Clark, Rich Salt, and Ian Sinclair Ford from GDPR Defender, who will be discussing what GDPR is, things to look out for, and how you can become even more compliant to remain competitive. We will then be joined by Andrew Borland from the Virtual Engineering Centre, who is the lead partner for LCR4 START, LCR 4.0 Holistic, and CMW 4.0, supporting businesses across Liverpool, Warrington, and Cheshire on their digital transformation journeys. So, without further ado, please welcome the team from GDPR.
Thanks very much, Emma. Nice one for that really kind introduction. I'm here with my colleague Ian today, who's our Chief Legal Officer. Rich, unfortunately, can't join us. He's actually doing some work with a client. But just a little bit of background and about the session and what we hope that you as individual businesses can take away from it today. GDPR is obviously one of the hot topics. It's a bit of a buzzword, and as we'll go into in a moment, it means different things to different people. For some people, it's very much seen as a little bit of a kind of a stick that government legislators can beat businesses with. But actually, what we're trying to get across today is it's not necessarily something you have to be afraid of, and in fact, it can be an asset to your business. So, I don't know the full sort of mixture of businesses on the call, but I guess it's fair to assume pretty much everyone's in the SME bracket. Maybe you're a new startup, maybe you've scaled a little bit, maybe you're still an SME, a small business, but you're kind of multi-generational. Regardless of what sector that you operate in, the chances are that some level of GDPR will apply to you. The kind of the really big obvious ones that people hear about a lot in the news is, there's been a cyber attack at Google, or, some of the big blue chip stock market listed company. And then a few months later, it comes out that someone didn't do something properly and they get a massive fine. And that's true. That's kind of the popular perception of GDPR, but it applies to all sizes of businesses as well. Even if you're a kind of a solo a solo operator, a sole trader, or just 2 founders who've started something new. Next slide, please, Emma. I feel a little bit like Chris Whitty saying that. So you've probably heard this phrase, data's the new oil. Yes and no, slightly less dirtier, depending on how you extract it, but it comes with a lot of risks. And Ian put this nice analogy together here, actually. Although you can particularly as a tech business or as a business focusing on innovation, although you can generate a lot of value from that data, it can have a bit of a sting in the tail. So if you're not storing that data properly, if you've not gathered it with the right consents, and you're falling foul of the legislation's broad terms of data processor and data controller, you can open yourself up for some pretty big punitive fines. And I think, it's very important probably at this stage to dispel the myth that it's not just big companies like the Talks, like the British Airways, kind of businesses that are on the receiving end of those fines. They're just the popular ones that you hear about. I talk a little bit more in a minute about how we formed the business and why, but we're very much of the opinion that if you can think back a few years to all the payment protection insurance adverts that you heard on the radio, it's like every single other lawyer was kind of saying, have you taken out a credit card or a loan? Have you been missold PPI? The insurance companies and banks have put aside a big wad of money to pay you off because you've got a claim against them. At the minute, more recently, you might be familiar with the Dieselgate scandal. So some car manufacturers, particularly the premium German brands, they're getting a lot of kind of class action claims brought against them right now for misstating the emissions. We're pretty sure that if not the next wave, one of the future waves of this kind of I'll sue you culture, it's going to be around GDPR. It's going to be around, right, did you get asked if you wanted to accept those cookies when you went on that website? Did you see a privacy notice? Were you aware that you were signed up to that mailing list when you got all these annoying emails? And although that seems fairly innocuous to something that's, potentially costing people money or potentially damaging the environment, as the other kind of two scandals are, we are starting to see now smaller and smaller businesses are on the receiving end of these kind of, like punitive, like borderline vexatious claims. Next slide, please, Emma. So, so that's the kind of the stick end, of why you might be a little bit bothered about it. On the carrot end, the more rewarding side of it, GDPR can be an asset. If you've got, if you think about a fuse box to your property or the plumbing in your building, it's nice when everything is properly plugged in and tidied up, and it's not mayhem, it's not spaghetti junction behind the scenes. And similarly, if you're storing large volumes of data and you're generating revenue from that data, and that's an asset to your business, not having to worry about whether that data is going to proportionately come back and bite you on the behind it's good for your peace of mind, but it's also really good when people are looking at either investing in your business or to acquire you. And we've got some stats again in a moment that look at the kind of the impact that GDPR can have on M&A activity and on investment activity within businesses. And I think one or two you might have questions about this from discussions we've had previously at the end. So yeah, please do feel free to to ask us a little bit about that in the Q&A section. Next slide, please, Emma. So, we're very careful in what we do as a business that helps people progress towards compliance, that, we say progress towards compliance a lot. And that's because the reality is there's so much legislation and there's so many parts of it that almost at times seem conflicting that it's actually very difficult for anyone to say anybody is compliant. And as is the nature of a lot of this kind of like bureaucratic stuff that gets brought in, a lot of it can be a sort of grey area, especially when it goes to court and people are spending a lot of money on lawyers to kind of either prove a claim or defend a claim. But the good news is, although there is a lot of grey area, there's absolutely a number of things that you can do, and indeed those things form the core part of our product as a compliance as a service business. And there's absolutely some things you can do to make sure that you are as compliant as possible, and that if you're not, or if there's areas that you're not compliant in, you can identify the kind of the best route forward to try and achieve better levels of compliance. I'll give a few examples of this at the end. One of the main ones listed here is the privacy notice. Again, this is something that a lot of SMEs unintentionally fall foul of. Most small businesses and startups, they go to a provider like Wix or Squarespace or WordPress to use a website template because it's cheaper than going to a bespoke web developer. But it's kind of not embedded from the start in those websites to have a privacy notice page. Again, if people go a step further, they might think, oh yeah, we need a privacy notice and we need to get a cookie bar and to appear on the website. So what they tend to then go and do is they go and Google free GDPR template or free privacy notice template. And, with a little bit of luck, depending on what you do and the type of data storage and controlling and processing that you're undertaking, sometimes that will be maybe 50, 60, 70% good enough for what you're doing. But by and large, a lot of the free template sites, they're a bit too generic. And if someone was to really kind of go into detail and scrutinize your activity and compare that to the kind of warnings and privacy notices that you give out, it's probably going to open you up again to some, albeit a small level of kind of non-compliance kind of action.
Johnny, sorry to just jump in here, but I just want to jump in here because the privacy notice is an absolutely critical piece of the work, because, as I said, this is what gives you lawful authority to capture and use and share data. Without it, you have no lawful authority. So every piece of data you capture is a claim. And even the free templates, as you say, they might be good enough, they might not, but they're not good enough because they don't adopt the right process or format. They have to be what's called layered. People I've spoken to think a concertina layers. It isn't. What layered means is I give you a Janet and John at the point you are giving data. So a real basic Janet and John. But then behind it, you can build up to, well, in our solution, we have 4 layers going from Janet and John all the way through to War and Peace. And that's the only way you can actually comply. So going to one layer of flat notice doesn't work because no one will read it. No one can read it. No one can understand it. And so it fails at the very first hurdle. So even using those 3 templates doesn't give you what you need. And that's where most people go wrong. They think it's about losing data. It absolutely isn't. It's about collecting it. So if you get it wrong from the start, well, you get it wrong from the start. So sorry, Johnny, I just had to put in on that one.
No, please continue to do so. So that's just for anyone who's recently joined. That's the voice of our Chief Legal Officer, Ian Sinclair Ford, colour commentating. Next slide, please, Anna. And again, just here, we're just taking the privacy notice as the kind of the case study piece. We go into a little bit more detail here. So again, really just to iterate, although there is a lot of kind of like free template websites out there, and not to trash on our competitors, but I think there is some businesses out there that kind of do this, subscription. You pay us a couple of £1 a month, we'll give you a maintained generic privacy notice. As Ian's underlined, it's 99% of the time it's not going to be good enough if someone really looks at the detail of what's in there, because these things have to be bespoke every time for them to really to be effective and to be valid. And that also goes for as you scale the business. So you might begin to use different types of data, use more data. You might, as you open up new product lines or open up new streams of revenue, if that's based on a new data processing or controlling activity, that your privacy notice then has to reflect that going forward. Otherwise, again, you're demonstrably non-compliant. Next slide, please, Emma. So, you've kind of heard all these ways that you're probably not compliant, and the sort of the damage that opens you up to. And that's not intended to be a fear sell. This is all designed to be kind of proactive monitoring and making life easier for you. I often use the phrase, although the main sorts of companies that we work with in our compliance work, they tend to be established SMEs of a certain size. They're probably a little bit over 1.5 to 2 million turnover. It's generally easier to fix these things at the foundation level. I use the analogy, think of it like a building. If you get the foundations right and you get everything right at the start, you can build up in a kind of a vertical line and maintain quality. That's easier than having built on slightly soft foundations, and maybe you've got to the 25th story and the building's starting to tilt a little bit. That's going to take a lot more work and a lot more resource and time. And let's face it, at the end of the day, as an MD or a founder, this is only going to be one, albeit very important, factor of a number of very important things that you're focusing on. You might be trying to raise investment. You're probably thinking about your minimum viable product. You're trying to get customers. You're doing 5 or 6 jobs rolled into one. So it's very much understandable why, particularly for first-time founders and startup businesses, this doesn't always kind of make its way up their priority list. And indeed, part of what we do as a business operating in this space is try and be a critical friend, and kind of offer that olive branch to businesses, as if to say, you don't have to be afraid of this. It doesn't have to take up all your time. You don't have to become a lawyer overnight. There's means and methods out there, including ourselves, that can take some of this pain away from you. Next slide, please, Anna. This just goes back a little bit to the thing I mentioned before about M&A activity and investment as well. There is data starting to come out now. Obviously, with GDPR only coming into effect in 2018, it's early days in regards to statistics capture. And if you remember at the time, you might remember when it actually came in, it was a little bit like, if anyone remembers the Y2K bug coming up to the millennium, there was a big furore about kind of, it's going to cause so many things to happen, X, Y, Z is going to happen, loads of businesses are going to go bankrupt overnight, that kind of thing, and it clashes with all this other legislation. And you know, the day after it came in, that was kind of it. It kind of disappeared out the headlines, and has been relatively quiet ever since, apart from when a big name has been fined, or you know, there was a bit of talk about it during the Brexit process about whether the UK would stay in data equivalence, so, you know, maintain the GDPR legislation post Brexit. But we're starting to see now very real effects come through in terms of statistics in M&A activity, investments, and in that field. And it's absolutely one of the kind of due diligence items that private equity firms, banks, and other kind of lenders will look at when they are given liquidity to a business, either in a debt or equity-based lending format. So again, it's just, you know, if you're thinking about doing a fundraise, or if you're thinking about taking on some debt to grow your business, this is, again, something that you should bear in mind, because ultimately it can affect a lender's attitude to your business. It can affect the risk rating, and accordingly it can affect the type of deal and the quality of deal that you can obtain from a lender. Next slide, please, Emma. So, you know, the sales pitchy part, and I'm conscious to try and keep this as broad brush and not turn this into just one big sales pitch. But what do we do? So Ian and I are two of the three founders of the business. As I said earlier, our CTO Rich is actually at a client premises today, doing some work. We typically target SMEs, although we are starting to do some work with startups, and we try to offer a cost-effective solution to all of the problems that I just described. So all of these things that I've talked about, that's fine if you're Google, or, you know, you're a big blue chip or FTSE 250 business. You can probably afford to hire in a really good legal counsel, which are quite expensive. It's not a dig, Ian, I promise. And you can probably afford to hire in expert data protection officers to come in, forensically examine every part of the business, and fix all the problems. But the reality is most businesses can't afford to do that. You know, 99% of the businesses in the UK are SMEs. And, you know, before we launched GDPR Defender, Rich, Ian, and I had all done a lot of consultancy in the SME market across different sectors. So Rich predominantly in software and tech startups, myself across manufacturing, supply chain, a little bit of tech, and Ian's kind of looked at all sorts of business sectors as well. And, you know, one of the things that has stood out in that time, you know, we might have helped businesses raise finance, you know, all other things like looking at product, etc. Resoundingly, in fact, every business we've come across has not had you know, a compliant approach and not had the right kind of internal attitude towards this. They've either kind of stuck their head in the sand about GDPR, or they've kind of you know, they've acquired some template for the website and they've said, yeah, we're GDPR compliant, we don't have to worry about this stuff, when they're not compliant at all. And so we kind of made it our mission to help MDs and founders get over this hurdle. You know, we all like business, we all like being in business, and it's a sad thing to see a company you know, open itself up to risk of fines. It's even sadder to see them get those fines. So we offer what we call our IGA, and it's a little bit like an MOT for your car. We offer the most comprehensive check that we know of in the GDPR compliance and data compliance industry in Europe, and we go in depth about a multitude of things, but that goes everywhere from, you know, do you have policies in case there is some kind of cyber breach, to what type of cybersecurity do you have? And that extends right down through your kind of staff and HR profile to, are your most junior members of staff leaving cabinets with personal information in them unlocked? Are you leaving important documents next to windows? At a really practical level, right through to, you know, what would your most junior member of staff do if a member of the public got in touch to say, I think you've mishandled my data, I want to speak to someone about it. So there's a whole spectrum of kind of practical, technical, managerial, you know, policy and kind of hands-on tasks that we go through with you to check. And the result of this is we produce you quite a comprehensive report The report tends to be between 30 and 35 pages, and we give you, as the founder, an exec summary at the start, because it can go into quite complex detail. And essentially that would say, okay, Ian Limited, we've done this check, you're a C- in report card terms. Here's where you're falling foul. Here's the kind of liabilities that opens you up to. And here's the kind of assets that you are missing out on by not fixing these things or trying to fix them. And we don't stop there. We give you a path to progress towards compliance. So we can, let's take you from that C- to an A. And this might take a number of months, and there'll be external services that we can broker in and apply to you depending on what it is. Maybe you need to do some government cyber essentials training with an accredited provider. Maybe you do need to get a data protection officer in. We can help you source a cost-effective one that's relevant to the size and scope of your business. But we show you how to progress towards that compliance state. And then more importantly as well, once you've spent the money to get there and you've invested in your business to do that, you don't want to let it go down the drain after 6 months or a year. We show you how you can stay compliant and the kind of checks that you should be doing as an MD or director or an owner, manager, or founder to keep your business in that compliant state. Next slide, please, Anna. So, this is a whistle-stop tour of something that I think the European Union's own site has probably about 15,000 plus pages on, and goodness knows how many PDFs. But what we've really tried to get across from this is don't look at this just as a kind of a tick box exercise. This has real ramifications, both negative and positive, for your business. Don't assume that because of the size or the sector of your business that it's not relevant to you, or that you're somehow discounted. Just because you're not managing NHS patient data does not mean that 99% of this legislation does not apply to you. And don't take shortcuts with it. Get in contact with someone who can give you a really candid assessment about the relevance of the legislation to your business and understands the kind of the niche elements of your business that are going to open you up to particular parts of the GDPR legislation. I'm conscious there's probably quite a lot of questions because this is so broad brush and it's such a kind of a complex topic for individual businesses. So I'll pause there, and if people want to put questions in the chat or just put hands up for Ian and I, or actually, Emma, would you rather go on to the VEC part of this? Sorry, I'm just conscious.
Sorry, could I just jog in and make a few comments if that's okay at this point? Hi, thanks for that. Yeah, nice presentation, Johnny. Totally agree with everything you say, obviously. But I think one of the key issues for me is I've been involved in data privacy since 1998, believe it or not. So it's quite a while. And to me, this is just another business process, like every business process you've got. And what you do with every business process is to try to make it as efficient and valuable as you can. This has got to be the same, because I've seen so many businesses that collect so much data that it just clogs the systems up and makes it impossible to actually achieve anything. So the way I look at GDPR is it's an effective tool to make you efficient. So to put it very simply, think about the data you actually need to create value. Because see so many businesses that collect loads of data think, oh, there's loads of value, and it just sits in the corner. So think about what you actually need, when you need it, when you can get rid of it, and just make your business as efficient as you can in terms of data. So think about it like every other business process you've got, and that really helps. And keep on top of the admin. That's the other one. I mean, I'm sure at home we all throw letters in the corner, and then in 3 weeks' time go through about 30 letters. Where if we just did 1 or 2 a day and threw them in the bin, it's a lot easier and it's a lot more efficient, and you deal with stuff faster. Same thing here. Deleting data is just as important as collecting it, but it's acknowledging what's valuable. So just like anything else you use in your business, it's looking at it from that perspective rather than just a pain in the neck. We all know it is. I mean, there's a review of 1,500 of the biggest businesses in the world who said, yeah, it was a real pain to get through this. But you know what? When we came through it, we found staff were happy because they knew how to handle data. Customers could see that we were treating their data with respect. So business retention has gone up, profitability has gone up. And that at the end of the day is what we all want, just by paying a little bit of attention to these rules. So yes, there is an investment of time and effort, but the rewards are there as well. I'll just finish off with one final little comment, which I found quite intriguing about how SMBs think. I was talking to one guy who runs an estate agency locally. He'd been doing it for a few years. He'd come out of the oil industry to start this up, and we were just having a chat. And he so basically said, I could put an advert in the local newspapers saying, do you want to deal with a GDPR compliant business and give them all your most valuable data or not? Which business do you want to deal with? And I could destroy my opposition in this area overnight. And I said, yeah, basically. And that is another thing you might want to think about. You know, no one's played those games yet, but that's a game you could play. So it's something just to think about. Thanks for that.
Okay, Andrew, do you want to run into your slides and we'll do the Q&A at the end?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I'm going to scroll on. Fantastic. Okay, good morning, guys. My name's Andrew Borland. I'm head of commercial at an organisation called the Virtual Engineering Centre. The VEC is a tech transfer centre of the University of Liverpool. So we're an industry-facing innovation centre with a remit to support SMEs in the Liverpool City region. Emma, do you want to skip on 2 slides? Cheers. So VEC's been around 10 years. We're not university boffins. We work with lots of university boffins, but the centre's purpose for being is to help businesses adopt new industrial digital technologies. Our background is in aerospace and defence, but we spent about 5 years in automotive and advanced manufacturing, and now we've broadened the offering out to all sectors. So technologies like artificial intelligence, like additive manufacturing, simulation, visualization, big data, cloud platforms, all that sort of thing is what we've been doing for 10 years with SMEs, trying to help you guys sort of accelerate your own digital adoption and digital journeys. Emma, do you want to move on a little bit? Next slide. Thank you. VEC has sort of 3 divisions. We're part of the University of Liverpool, and we've got offices at Daresbury. We've got our new building, the Digital Innovation Facility on Dover Street in Liverpool on campus, which is the one on the far right. And we've also got a presence in the university's XJTLU campus in China as well. So there's a VEC Daresbury, VEC China, and a VEC Liverpool City Centre. Let's move on a slide or 2 slides. So how can we help? We're currently operating 3 fully funded support programs across Liverpool City region and Cheshire and Warrington City region. So the first one, which is probably the one most applicable to this audience, and so the reason for partnering up with Johnny and the guys at GDPR is around digital strategy. So we've got lots of these new digital technologies that are emergent and maturing, and have disrupted industries like the music industry and online streaming industry, taking the video rentals market out and all that sort of thing. But we've also seen them now move into more mature businesses, and digital technologies being a way for you to rethink your business model. So for some of you, digital transformation will be how your sector is changing. For others, digital transformation will be what new technologies can do to help you modify, adapt, and improve your business. So that's our START program, is trying to sort of get to grips with, okay, what technologies out there, what are your competitors using, and what technology can add value to your business to ensure kind of the entrenchment of your value proposition and your success in the long term. And where's it going to go in future? So a little bit of a kind of consultancy support package on digital strategy from our START package, START program. Then we've got in the Liverpool City region, Holistic, which is taking a more sort of broad linked perspective, looking at the Web 3.0 technologies and the digital supply chains, not in terms of necessarily your logistics supply chains that most people sort of think of, but saying actually, if you're going to be a successful digital business that's transformed digitally, you want to work with other businesses that are equally digitally competent or equally agile. So how do you start kind of cross-linking to make sure that you can be part of supply chains of the future that are going to add value in the future, rather than being one of those legacy industries and those legacy supply chains that just sort of dies off? What skills and expertise have you got in the company that might lend themselves to new opportunities? If you don't have the complete skill set that you need, how can you work with people you you already know, or maybe work with new people to create little supply chain clusters where you can really kind of multiply the value proposition and multiply the bang for your buck and get into new sectors. So that's holistic. And then Cheshire and Warrington 4.0 for any of you in Cheshire and Warrington region, that's a manufacturing focused program on industrial digitization. So I'll focus in on digital strategy. Emma, if you move on a slide or two. Thank you. So digital strategy is a complementary kind of activity to your business strategy. You're in business for a reason. You've identified a market opportunity. You've brought a group of people together. You've got some assets. You've got some skills, and you're providing a service which adds value to people, and you're seeking investments or you're seeking customers. Digital disruption could potentially be a threat to the business that you're operating. Things may change, or it could be a tool that allows you to realize new opportunities. So when you're doing the business plan, you're doing kind of the 5-year forecast and that's a horizon scan of where do we want to be, how are we going to get there, where do we want the business to be in a few years, how are we going to get there. So we kind of want to encourage you to think about what the digital implication will be to the business. So in terms of leadership, in terms of planning, the skills that you need within the workforce, the people you need to work with within your supply chain, and what technologies you're going to need to adopt and how you're going to adopt them and what investment you need. So most people, when they think about digital, default to the toys. So they'll think, I need a bit of AI, or I need a VR headset, or I'm going to need an IoT device. The technology is a means to an end. It's an enabler. The starting point for us when we kind of sit down with boards and we have away days with people is to say, in your sector, what are your competitors doing, and how are these technologies, as they come down in price, as they become more accessible, going to change your business model. In manufacturing, one example of that is kind of a move to manufacturing as a service rather than manufacturing as a product. So traditionally, a manufacturer would fabricate something, they get a set of requirements from a client, or they produce a mass-produced product in the market, they make it, they parcel it up, they sell it, it leaves the factory gates, end of story. The bigger opportunity is to be able to do full life cycle manufacturing, is to say manufacturing as a service. So I'm going to sell you a product and I'm going to guarantee it's never going to fail. So rather than pay me all the money up front and call me when it breaks, pay me a little bit of money up front and then pay me a monthly fee. And I'll guarantee it won't fall over. How do you do that? By adding sensors. So previously a dumb device or a dumb product that would go out into the world can now for 10, 15 quid have some IoT sensors attached and a Wi-Fi connection or a 5G connection, which allows the thing to phone home with some usage data or some behavioral characteristics. You add a big data set together and you run some algorithms, some time series algorithms looking at what it's doing, and you can spot anomalies. So you can say, actually, that particular oven is showing some changes in temperature characteristic or in voltage or resistance. We think the heating element's about to fall over, so we're going to send a maintenance engineer out to fix it. We think that pump is showing some abnormalities in flow rate. You might have a diaphragm that's about to fail. We're going to send an engineer out to fix it. So you move into that manufacturing as service bit. The same's true of hospitality, of retail. Airbnb have kind of decimated the hotel market. It was a more accessible innovation in the business model. It's had implications for the existing sort of incumbents in the market, and that's the sort of thing we're talking about when we think about digital strategy. Is what do you guys need to know about the technology and the business applications in the near and medium term, and how can you plan for the future? Move on a slide for me, Emma. So sort of 95% of SMEs have adopted at least 2 digital technologies over the last few years. 50% have adopted 4 to 7 digital technologies. Most of the focus there is on reducing cost, to making things like back office processes more efficient, making better use of the resources you've got. And then the next 2 are introducing new products and new processes to the business. So opening up new revenue streams, new value propositions there. And the third one is for people who are all about the tech, who actually have a technology product that's out there. So you don't need to be a tech business to need to be interested in digital strategy or to take advantage of that. Digital strategy, it's not about digital marketing. It's not just digital marketing strategy. It's a more deep-rooted sort of thing that really has its roots across every division of the business. Next slide, please, Emma. So processes is nothing new. So the picture I put up there is the old American Express logo. So we kind of think of American Express as being the credit card people that very few folk have, because you just get the air miles, and it's not accepted that in that many places. American Express started out in 1850 as a freight forwarding business in New York. So they had offices near railway stations, and they had big warehouses, and they were the trusted people for moving stuff across the US railroad network. They saw that opportunity in railroads, and then they saw that alongside the railroads, telegram lines were being put up. So previously, they were the people you trusted to ship your stuff around the country. Then there's this newfangled electricity stuff and telegram lines alongside railroads, so you can communicate much faster. So that then moved them into 1857. They said, okay, we're trusted by people to move physical goods. Could we be trusted by people to move money, to handle their money? So you can communicate between American Express offices. You can cash some money in. The American Express in Buffalo and New York will telegram the American Express office in Los Angeles and say, yes, I've received payments from this person. You can now ship the goods. That changed their entire business model, and they moved from being a freight forwarding business to being a bank, essentially. In 1891, so we're going from 1850 to 1891, they move into travelers checks. So you're on your European tour, you're on your grand tour, you're on your vacation, you need security of currency. So American Express provides these documents, these travelers checks, which by confirmation at banks and telegrams allow you to carry some currency with you, or allow you to cash US dollars in for local currency. And then by 1958, they moved into being one of the first credit cards. So they went from trusted people for freight forwarding, to trusted people for confirming payment, to trusted people as a bank, to trusted people that are using this newfangled magnetic swipe technology in credit cards in the 50s and onwards. So this process of innovation is nothing new, and it's just an example of how a company can change from one form to realize its assets, in this case its physical locations and its networks, to be able to adopt new technologies, first in telegrams and telephone lines, and then in credit cards and in travelers checks, to be able to open up new revenue streams and ensure that the business is successful and endures. Emma, if you want to move on for me, thanks. So how do you approach digital adoption, digital transformation? Two kind of nice diagrams there. There's an externally focused element and an internally focused element. So from an externally focused element, what digital can do for your customers? What could digital do to make your customers happier, or to allow you to provide new services that you think that they will buy? That might be improving your existing process. Uber Eats is a good example of that. You might have had a little bakery on the high street. Uber Eats now allows you to tap into that market that's sitting on the couch and would never have gotten in the car and come to your door, but is quite happy to get on an app and say, actually, I want some cake. I want it delivered to the door, and I don't care if it costs me £5 delivery. So the externally focused dimension of digital disruption there, and Uber Eats is a great example of somebody else who's bringing the enabling technology. It'll take a cut of your revenue, but it doesn't require you to invest in the infrastructure yourself. The other external dimension is that sort of strategy bit. Where is your sector going? What is the world going to look like in your business in 10 years? What are those competitors that you look at and really envy? People you've seen at trade shows, or people you see on social media that are innovating new products, and you're thinking, I need a little bit of that. Or maybe you're thinking 2 steps ahead and saying, okay, well, I can see an application for these technologies that would allow us to diversify or get the jump on the competition. So external focus to digital transformation, and then the internal focus is on organizational change. Is the first one, is how can you make the business more efficient? How can you make the business more diverse and appealing in its operating practices, so you'll attract the skills that you need for the next few years, but also make sure that you've got that kind of energetic, agile base. One of the big challenges of digital transformation is getting the message across that it's not about putting older members of staff out of a job. A lot of the conversation is focused on automation. So you're going to automate admin jobs out. You're going to put robots in place to replace sort of physical labor jobs. The real value is not in that. The value is in improving your margins. There was a big study done in Belgium looking at digitization, looking at this exact problem. Okay, if I digitize, I'm going to lose my job. If my business digitizes, I'm going to lose my job. That's a threat to jobs. They actually found that the biggest threat to jobs was the business that you work for not being competitive. The biggest threat to your business is you not being competitive, not automation, not the digital transformation bit. Digital transformation helps you become competitive. And when you're kind of dealing with staff and they're saying, you're going to put me out of a job, actually we're not. We're going to free you up to do the more high value stuff, the more value add stuff, that's going to ensure that you're stimulated, you're prosperous, you can take a bigger paycheck and make a bigger contribution to the company, and the company can grow and go forward. So digital transformation at the organizational perspective, and then the final bit is where most start, but where we finish is the technology. Okay, once you've got a plan, once you've got your vision, what technology do you need to adopt within the company, and how are you going to get there, how are you going to adopt it? And that's all about new revenue streams and new opportunities. And all the enablers there. So that's okay, Emma. Thanks. Let's scan on. Next one. 2 dimensions to this. There's digitization and there's digitalization. So the distinction we always like to make is you digitize an existing process. You take an analog process, might be something you've done on forms or in paper format, and you make it into a digital process where you're doing on a spreadsheet, or you're doing it with an iPad app. Digitization is about looking particularly at the internal process and saying, actually, with all these digital tools, can I take a process out of the mix? When we work in manufacturing, one of the big things we do is connect old machine tools to a network. So we can take a 50-year-old lathe or a CNC machine, and we connect it to Microsoft Teams. So all of a sudden, the tool doesn't need to do a job sheet with a pen and paper, which gets handed to shift supervisor, which goes to ops manager, which goes to back office to say how long it took to do a job and what issues that were there. The system can collect the data from the machine, and they have an iPad app, and they manage by exception. So you remove the need for a whole process within the business. So 2 dimensions there to think about: digitization and digitalization. Next one, please, Emma. Little kind of diagram we got there on kind of the strategy of digital transformation, sort of, awareness of what's available, having your vision, setting your vision for the business, determining what your roadmap's going to be, what the terrain you've got across, you digitizing or you digitalizing, what technology skills you need, and then very much focus on the human element, the human-centric bit of it is carrying your customers and your staff along with you on this journey to make sure that it is adding value to the customer and it's something your customer wants, and also making sure that your staff feel like they're included and they're not being cast aside. They're part of the picture of prosperity and success in future, and then testing those ideas in small units, testing your ideas for transformation and change before you ultimately implement them, and then your enduring drivers there, your leadership, your ops and management, your culture, the systems that will grow out of it, and then the automation of that through AI and data sets. Next one, please, Emma. So this is kind of, if we get onto the cybersecurity recovery and resilience bit, this is the link with GDPR Defender. So many of you are digitizing. There's more data in many different forms, not just personal data, but sort of data that will be sensitive to your clients, that will be commercially confident. There'll be intellectual property elements of what you're doing. There'll be a lot of value within your businesses, your processes and your IP captured within the business. So everyone's aware of the consequences of breach of data protection, but there's a commercial element to cybersecurity and business continuity and resilience as well. So cybercrime is estimated to cost. It'll cost us 10.5 billion by 2025. It is an epidemic. It's a big problem that's out there. 33% of businesses are targeted on a weekly basis. Now your network technicians and your sysadmins may say, okay, that's just a brute force attack that firewalls and standard infrastructure notice and we log, but there can be much more kind of insidious attacks. Typically, an incursion within a system is undetected for 205 days. So if you've been done, you probably won't figure out that you've been done for over 200 days. So you have a malicious actor that has compromised your network, your file storage, your website, whatever, it could be, on average 205 days that there's a bad guy inside the system. So you need to be mindful that you really need to take ownership and prioritize the cybersecurity elements, because whilst that person is in your system, they're gathering your intellectual property, they're gathering your secrets, they're gathering your customer lists, but also they're doing that man in the middle thing of potentially collecting data for much more serious breaches. So 69% of businesses don't find out themselves that they've been done. Somebody else tells them that I've had malicious emails from someone on one of your addresses, or from an external kind of party or consultant to say, actually, you've been nobbled. So 69% of people don't actually find out that their own house has been burgled. The neighbour tells them. That's a cybersecurity kind of bit. Emma, if you move on for me, and just outlining those kind of threats. So the viruses, the malware, most people are familiar with from day one. The ransomware element, somebody compromising your system, encrypting your files and holding you to ransom to say, actually, if you want your business back, you're going to pay me some money, you're going to pay me some bitcoins, and I will hopefully decrypt your files. Big problem for hospitals to be able to, they're being completely paralyzed by ransomware attacks. But there's not just the element of somebody being malicious to take out an anonymous company. There are focus attacks. If they think you're worth money, they can come after you and hold you to ransom by encrypting systems. There's the phishing attacks, which everyone's familiar with. Traditionally focused on kind of social engineering the email bit, but increasingly apps and messaging services. So you have a duty of care, or certainly from a commercial perspective, to make sure you look after your customers and make sure that you do what you can within app development, but also within the process of the services you provide, to make sure your customers don't become the victim of this. Any phishing attack will kind of tarnish your brand and be associated with, okay, well, you were the business that was kind of associated with the phishing attack, even though it may not have been any breach on your side or any sort of failure to take appropriate precaution. So it's a proactive thing on phishing attacks. Insider threats. I did kind of some work with an academic a few years back who was a pen tester. He was paid to breach other people's systems, and he got paid by a big insurance company in Manchester. Said, we've had some consultants in, we've redesigned our systems, we don't think you can get to us, I want you to try and breach our security, breach our systems. So he was a white hat hacker, tried to use all the traditional external sort of exploits and attacks, and they'd done a pretty good job. This insurance company, it locked themselves down pretty tightly, and it didn't work. So he took a different tack. He employed one of his PhD students, or paid one of his PhD students to apply for a job there. Student went to work there, and student was instructed to pick up a box, write on it confidential, and then go around and pick up some confidential documents from finance and customer services, put them in the box, and come outside and meet the guy in the car park. The security guard actually helped the student hold the door open, apparently, when they came out with the box, and he sat in his Porsche and he took some photos of a couple of documents and emailed them to the MD and said, I've got you. And then the MD came out and they had a big laugh about it. But it's a nice example of as much as you focus on the digital security and you may try to kind of pay somebody to make that problem go away, cultures and behaviors within the organization, you don't have to be Google or Boeing to have an insider threat that's corporate espionage. In the other example, you could have a disgruntled employee that can cause you some reputational damage and some liability by malicious act. So that physical control of documentation, locking filing cabinets, making sure group policies on SharePoint drives and network shares are appropriate, and making sure you log activity and you're looking out for misnomers. Disputed denial of service attacks, just a malicious attack to take out your website or to take out your system. There's another example, but I want to put it in there. Industrial espionage, I've touched upon, more applicable to bigger organizations, but also if you are a fast-growing tech SME or you've got some really unique IP or intellectual property, be mindful. You may be, whether it's a bigger competitor looking to get the jump on you, or one of your peers, there's always the risk of losing sensitive IP through industrial espionage. And then finally, kind of the man-in-the-middle attacks, which is more related to those of you operating sort of Wi-Fi networks. So lots of different threats out there. that's why cybersecurity is important. It's not just the loss of the personal data; it's also the loss of commercial reputation and the trade secrets and some of the nous and the know-how you've got within the business. And you want to skip on for me? Cheers. Few instances of various sort of headlines that have been out in the last few years there of hacking, phishing, and cyber attacks that have taken people out. And then next slide, which I think is penultimate. Or nearly penultimate. So the other side of this is you've got to assume that at some point the worst is going to happen. You are going to get done. It's a bit like sort of waiting to be burgled. Once it's happened, and also once it's happened, it's more likely that you'll be a victim a second time as well. So if you take that mindset, is you've taken every precaution that you can. You've looked at the business's operations. You've looked at the cybersecurity element. But eventually something's going to happen which is going to take your systems out. So there will be a disaster. Now, it might be a cyber threat that's the disaster, or it might be another type of threat that's caused you a disaster. How are you going to recover from that? And how are you ensure that recovery is resilient? So for each of you, what would be a disaster for your business? Each of you, it will be different. What are the consequences going to be? How are you going to recover from that? What can you control? What measures can you put in place? And what's your plan going to be for disaster recovery? Emma, if you move on for me. Cheers. So we've had a couple of disasters already in the last couple of years. Pandemic, global pandemic. Nobody can come into the office. Everybody has to work from home. For those of you who had a disaster recovery plan, it probably paid dividends. For many others, you might have been running around like headless chickens trying to figure out how you're going to provision remote access to IT services. We've had the pandemic as an instance of a disaster, Brexit and the border tensions as well, supply chain disruption, arguably, certainly for a lot of manufacturers and logistics companies, that was a disaster. Lorries queuing up on the motorway, waiting to get through the port, goods stuck in transit, that's a disaster. The other ones on there, you got power failure. If the power goes out, what does that mean for your business? If the power goes out at Amazon Web Services or Google Data Center, if you're a digital business, what does that mean? If you're selling baked goods, if the power goes out and the ovens in the shop don't work, how are you going to recover from that? Floods, another example, terrorism, riots and insurrection. If there's a riot down Mount Pleasant and you can't get into the company and your customers don't want to come and see you, how are you going to plan for that? You're going to have a failover site. In the cyber sort of dimension, it's building in redundancy. So if your IT systems go down, you might have a load of old computers that you keep in a store cupboard that have got an old build, but actually if everything's compromised and infected and you can't roll back to an earlier image to recover from, you've got these things. So once the network's back up and you've got an internet connection, at least you could maybe have one old box that serve as a server to get your mail servers back up, and you've got a load of old laptops or old desktops that would allow your staff to keep working, and importantly, keep billing clients, making sure the money keeps flowing. So a few examples of disaster there. Emma, if you want to scan on for me. So where do you start with business continuity planning? How are you going to plan to make sure that you have this resilience, that you've got your cybersecurity done, but you've got this resilience and you've got this recovery plan? How do you create a business continuity plan? A few steps. First, think about what the threats and risks are to your business. If you're a manufacturing business, that might be lorries stuck at port and customs. That might be a substation on your industrial estate fails. If you're a digital business, it might be Amazon Web Services goes down from a malicious attack that's got nothing to do with you, but you use AWS for hosting. So you're a victim of that by association. If you're a professional services company, it may mean that you can't see clients in person, as we saw in the pandemic. So how are you going to move to remote meetings? If you need things signed in person, is Google, is Adobe Online Sign good enough? All of those sorts of things. But same for people who are in kind of personal care. We've got used to it over the last year with physios and doctors and care workers sort of taking necessary PPE precautions. But 2 years ago, that would have been difficult to imagine and quite an abstract concept for people. So first thing, what are the threats to your business, unique to your business, and do your traditional sort of risk assessments of probability of them happening versus consequence of them happening, severity. That leads you into your impact analysis for the business. How are you going to keep the business going? How are you going to keep cash flowing? How are you going to keep invoicing customers? How are you going to keep delivering services? And that'll take you to your mitigation plans and making a deliberate choice to build in redundancies where possible, and then moving into response and recovery plans so that once the disaster's happened, you can get back on your feet with minimum service. How you either going to return to full strength, or how are you going to endure and maintain the minimum service until the disaster blows over. And then the final sort of 3 steps that test it. I used to work for a data center business, so we hosted thousands of servers for people, and the big threat for us was power failure or internet comms failure. Every week we tested our backup generator, so we had a massive generator to power all these racks that we had, but we never actually actively tested a failover up until a certain point, and that was a really big deal. We tested the generator, we knew it worked, we knew we had battery backup, but we'd never actually pulled the switch which turned the power off to all the servers to make sure that the batteries would hold the load and to make sure that the generator would start up on its own and take the load. So testing your assumptions and testing your procedures and your precautions is a big deal. Maintaining them is the other bit. Don't do it once. Don't make it a work package for somebody and then it gets filed in a drawer and never thought of again. Maintain the protocols and the procedures, maintain the software licenses, maintain the backups, maintain the thinking, and then review on a regular basis. Next slide, please, Emma. Little pyramid. This is kind of 101 in business continuity and planning. At the bottom, you've got your considerations for disaster recovery, and then at the top, you've got the broader plan, the business continuity plan. So servers, storage, and network, from a digital point of view, are your basic backbone, your infrastructure. Data backup, offsite replication. There's a difference between backup and replication. If you want to make sure that you've got some backups on slower drives that are from a long time ago. What would happen if you're in that instance where your systems have been compromised for over 200 days, a piece of malware deploys and locks you out of your system. You think, great, I'll roll it back to last week's image. You redeploy last week's image, but actually the malware was sitting in there dormant at that time anyway. So as soon as you redeploy the image gets corrupted as well. So have a regular replication and redundancy in your IT systems and your storage, but also bear in mind that you want a snapshot of a longer horizon of time, so that if you have been compromised, you can roll back and recover from that. Think about alternative sites. Are you friendly with somebody else who's in business? If you can't access your premises, if you're a professional services company, would they let you pitch up at their place? If you're a manufacturing business, if you lose the office functionality or you lose the shop floor, would another business be able to allow you to share their premises, so you can have a kind of a community, a reciprocal community of support? IT technology kind of recovery processes at the top of that disaster recovery, and then you move into your more traditional sort of validation, testing, the business continuity plan, and your insurance elements of risk management. There's always the element of insurance as well. You can insure against this stuff, but the more physical, practical precautions you take, the lower your premiums will be, or the less of the need for insurance, full stop, and building that into the whole kind of vision for the company. I think that's about as done, Emma, apart from the checklist at the end. So final points: secure it, be prepared to recover, make sure you're resilient, rehearse it, make sure it works, review it on a regular basis, and build the culture into the business at both leadership level and shop floor. That's a very tenuous link to GDPR's work, but actually when you kind of go away and think about it, the service these guys offer and the line of work they're in, there's a commercial element to the non-personal data as well, and there's a value in making sure you're secured. We've had a pandemic, not to be a doom monger, but the next major crisis is probably going to be a large-scale cyber attack, isn't it? Now that may be targeted at government institutions, but we'll all be brought along sort of in the chaos. So making that plan for if the internet fails, if the cyber element of the business goes away, particularly if you're going to that digital transformation piece, what's your plan for going back to local systems or going back to sort of the more analog working practices to make sure you stay in business, to make sure you look after your customers, and then to make sure that the cash keeps flowing. That's me. I'll stop talking there and hand back over to Johnny.
Thanks, everyone. So I'll just open it up to the floor. Does anybody have any questions at all for any of the speakers from today?
We were that good.
Did we overwhelm you or just you? I'll take responsibility for the teaching. Oh, okay.
Okay, so what would your guys' last tips or pieces of advice be for businesses who've, you know, kind of attended today, you know, probably have a lot to think about? And what would the next steps be, do you think, to like maybe breaking down what to do next?
From a squarely GDPR perspective, you know, we'll always sit down and, you know, give an hour or so for free to talk through this stuff. And you know, like whether you work with us as a business or you know, I'd imagine most of the kind of services out there, even if you're kind of going to the big guys, if you're a large corporate and you're going to someone like Capgemini, you know, one of the big IT consultancies, the cost of this stuff tends to scale as well. So it's, you know, it's usually more cost efficient to kind of nip it in the bud early days. Definitely, I think one of the big themes to remember that both Ian and Andrew touched on is to think of this as a business process in the same way that you'd think of marketing, hiring, you know, product management, those sort of things. Take that holistic view of it. You know, don't do it in isolation. Make it work for you. And if you're worried about cost as well, you know, so one of the key services that we provide as well is if you've paid corporation tax over recent years, there's a legal provision there to essentially get what is like a rebate on that paid tax to fund this work to help you become more compliant as well. So there's, you know, there is tools out there. It's you're not alone. You're not dropped into this kind of ocean of problems. There's tried and tested methods of approaching this, of fixing it, and of making it work for you and become an asset as opposed to a liability. The only other thing I'd say, sorry, is that's Emma. That's my kind of like community tech community email address. I can pop my GDPR Defender email address in the chat for you there if you just want to reach out to me and ask any questions via email as well.
Brilliant. And Andrew, kind of same question to you. What would you say the next steps are? Anyone looking to digitalize their company or creating their digital strategy? How do people get in touch with you guys?
We've got my email address is there. Have a look at the Virtual Engineering Centre website. If you're in Liverpool City region or Cheshire and Warrington, we have funded support programmes. It's not going to be a case of we give you a slideshow and never see you again. The packages, we pride ourselves that the programmes we deliver are quite qualitative, hands-on. They're tailored to each individual business. So if you have any interest in digital transformation, whether that's adopting sensors and IoT within the company, whether that's connecting your systems together a little bit better to be able to make the most out of sort of Microsoft backends, or if you're looking at that top level kind of digital strategy bit for a new product or process within the business, let us know. The VEC team have kind of got a wealth of expertise and 10 years doing this with SMEs, so happy to see how we can support anyone.
Brilliant. Okay, well, if we haven't got any questions, I will send the recording and a link with all the PDFs from today's presentations. Johnny, I'll put your other contact detail in there as well. But if that's everything, then thank you very much to everybody, all the speakers, all the registrations and attendees. And anyone can get in touch with me after following the event as well, if anyone does have any questions or anything like that. Brilliant. Thanks, Liz. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.